Why are Baha'is hopeful despite turbulent times? Now, I'm going to take an unusual tack here, and you'll see what it is as it unfolds, but bear with me. Because very often we look for sort of feel-good things, temporary band-aids that make us feel good in the moment. And that doesn't seem to be the moment of history through which we're going right now. Turbulent adolescence does not lend itself to platitudes. There is a wonderful quote from an Austrian-American management consultant that some of you may be familiar with. His name is Peter Drucker. He's an author and written some marvelous books. This is what he says, and I want to start with that to frame this conversation. He says, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence itself. Rather, it is acting with yesterday's logic. Acting with yesterday's logic. So the answer to the question of this talk, why are Baha'is hopeful despite turbulent times, starts with the fact that Baha'is believe that we've been gifted by the latest in the series of divine revelators, a new lens that yields a new logic, a unique perspective on what's going on in the world, and a framework for understanding our reality and reframing it. There is a saying that I use in my coaching practice that I really love that applies here. Nothing in life has meaning until we assign it meaning. It's actually a very profound statement. I didn't come up with it, but it is very profound. It is how we choose to interpret what's happening that dictates how we react to it and the emotions it engenders and then the behaviors that follow on from those emotions. Let me start by emphasizing very clearly, we Baha'is are not naive. We are not in denial about reality, nor are we attempting to sugarcoat it. Rather, we see and accept things as they are. Not better than they are, not worse than they are, as they are. We too, like everybody else, any thinking, caring individual, find ourselves distressed and suffering and deeply empathizing with the suffering of others. But we do not feel like we're victims of random and uncontrollable events. And we are not confused because of the framing of reality that we choose to adopt. And it is this framing that I want to start by sharing with you. When we look at all the turbulence in our world today, all the vicissitudes, the adversities, the calamities, we perceive in them, we see the genesis of these adversities. So we understand where they came from. We also acknowledge their necessity. We are aware of the direction that this turbulence is going to go in, and we discern, based on our faith in the words of Baha'u'llah, we discern the outcome, the ultimate outcome. And in the meantime, we intelligently labor to assuage the fury and anticipate with undimmed vision the consummation of the hopes and fears that all this turbulence engenders.
Sorry to interrupt. Your slide is still on the intro slide. I don't know if you meant to be advancing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So this was the thanks, Payman. Okay, so these are the things that we're aware of, right? It's much easier to face a difficult present if we have an understanding of where it's going and have assurance that the outcome is going to be good. So even though Baha'is, I said, are aware of the direction, and I'm going to unpack each of these for you in a second, at least my understanding of them based on the Baha'i writings, we may not know exactly how things will unfold or the timing, but we basically have a sense of the direction. You know, we're going north, not west, not east, not south. And we know what the ultimate outcome is. We know where what the destination is, but there may be tortuous paths and swings in the road that nobody can anticipate, and we can't either, and we don't claim to be able to. So the analogy I like to give to frame this is like a person who is very ill. Humanity's ill. Like imagine that you've been a smoker all your life and your doctor has been trying to warn you for years that you need to give up smoking because it's going to kill you. And you don't listen. And then one day, decades on, you get the diagnosis. You've got cancer. You've got cancer of the lungs, and it says whatever stage 3. And if you don't take action, this is you're now basically on the path towards a rapid death. And you then turn on a dime and you start doing all the things you always told yourself you could never do, right? And so that ends up saving your life. You change your lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've known people who've done this, so I know that it's possible. I'm not saying it's possible for everyone, but this is what Baha'is have hope and faith in, that by following the instructions given by the current divine teacher sent by the Creator, we can right the ship, so to speak. We can get over this cancer. So if we know that that is going to be the ultimate outcome and we have faith, then we're willing to go through the grind. And for those of you who have loved ones, have had loved ones, or yourselves have gone through it or are going through chemotherapy and all the treatments for cancer, they're truly horrific. Sometimes feel worse than the disease itself. But why are you willing to go through them? Because you're hoping for the ultimate outcome. So this is basically what humanity is going through at the moment. So let's start with the various aspects. I said that there is a new understanding in the Baha'i faith about the genesis of our tribulations. It's very interesting. First of all, this period was foretold in the Baha'i writings and is referred to as the Great Transition, that humanity has been going through as a result of the forces, spiritual forces that were let loose with the coming of Baha'u'llah. This happens with the coming of every revelation. It's not unique to the coming of Baha'u'llah, but given the state of our collective growth and given that our lessons are really dire at the stage of adolescence, the force of these spiritual forces is even greater. So these forces have given rise to two processes that we will examine in a minute of integration and disintegration that are going on simultaneously. What's interesting is that the Baha'i writings say that all of these processes, including the disintegrative ones, are aspects of a single plan whose source is God, or the God of your understanding, whose author is Baha'u'llah, and the theater of whose operations is the entire planet. And we're truly starting to see this now with the rapid acceleration of the forces of disintegration that are encompassing all regions. There is not a part of the world that has remained untouched, and it is just going to get worse, basically. So we also understand, or have a new understanding of why this is happening. So we understand the genesis. So why is it happening? So here are a few reasons, few ways to help us understand. As I say, we seek to understand so that we don't become fearful, so that we don't become paralyzed, so that we don't feel like victims, and so that we can take action because we believe in the ultimate outcome. So Baha'u'llah says that the whole earth is now in a state of pregnancy, and the day is approaching when it will have yielded its noblest fruits. So again, a vision of accepting reality of this is what's going on. For women who've given birth, you know what contractions feel like. You know what it feels like when you feel like your body's going to be torn asunder, that you're never going to be whole again, with this child ripping its way through you, right? As one of the I forget his name, but he used to write columns, very funny columns at the same time that I was expecting. His wife was expecting, and I remember he wrote a column saying, "Hey guys," speaking to the men, Do you really understand what's going on here? Basically, our wives are being asked to push a basketball through a straw. This is the level of miracle, essentially, but also effort. So don't take it lightly. Essentially, that's what humanity is trying to do, trying to push a basketball through a straw. All right. So that's the first thing. Now, what are we going to give birth to? The Baha'i writings say we're going to give birth to the unity of the human race and to world peace. So, world peace and the unity of the human race. In other words, what's at stake is not just some deal that we're going to cobble together with one or two or five or 10 other countries. It is nothing less than the accomplishment of world peace and the unification of humanity. Elsewhere in the Baha'i writings, we're told that these oppressions are preparing us for the most great justice. This is the term from the Baha'i writings. This most great justice is described as the indispensable foundation for the most great peace, the peace in which basically the disparate elements of humanity will be fused together into a single organism. In order for what to happen? In order to then prepare the way to usher in a new world civilization. So again here, this ultimate outcome that the Baha'is believe in and are looking forward to is nothing short of justice for all that leads to world peace, that leads to a world civilization. Now, the second why are we going through this, is because humanity is in the throes of a turbulent adolescence. So in our individual lives, we don't question the fact that we go through these various stages, and we all accept that our teenagers are going to act out and life is going to be tough for a few days, years. I wish it were days, years. But parents don't lose hope, and they don't throw their kids out of the house because they have perspective. They see the end in the beginning, and they realize they need to exercise wisdom and compassion, and they can't disengage from their young ones either. They have to be present, constantly trying to guide and correct and love and encourage them until they're ready to assume the capacities of adulthood. So the same is going on with us collectively. We are in the throes of a transition that is marked by, and this is again from Shoghi Effendi, who was the second interpreter, authorized interpreter of the writings of Baha'u'llah, and the guardian of the Baha'i faith, the head of the Baha'i faith, for a number of years. And he says that this tumult of this age is characteristic of the impetuosity and irrational instincts of youth. I mean, it truly applies to our world. When we see some of the stuff that's going on, we think this is so impetuous. These decisions are being made without thought. They're irrational. And then he goes on to say it's follies, it's prodigality, it's pride. So youth tends to be very proud. It's my way or the highway. I know what I'm doing. Don't try to correct me, right? It's self-assurance, it's rebelliousness, and contempt of discipline. So these are all hallmarks of everything that we're seeing in our world today. Having the perspective of the parent fills us with hope and energizes us to act as opposed to succumb to apathy and paralysis of will. Folks, I think the biggest danger facing us is not the turbulence we see. The biggest danger facing us is that we respond to it with apathy, disillusionment, and then paralysis. We are at a time in human history where we can ill afford to be paralyzed. This is the time, in fact, where we need to step up our activities. We have so many global challenges, from the moral, spiritual, to the mental, psychological rates of depression and mental disease are on the rise. We have global challenges like climate change and the nuclear threat is at the highest, and we've got genocides and wars and trade wars and all of this. And we have to solve all of them. because the alternative is not tenable. It's driving off the cliff and self-destruction. That is not an option. So we have to do what we can to bolster ourselves, first by fixing the way we interpret everything that's going on. Now, this idea of going through a turbulent adolescence is related to something that I alluded to at the beginning, that there are two simultaneous processes that go on when you're growing up. You have to let go of the habits of childhood, that's the disintegrative process, and you have to adopt new tools and capacities to equip you for a new stage of life, a mature stage of life. And those are the processes of integration. It's a messy process. I have given in previous talks, I'm not going to repeat it. Feel free to go and look them up. A good analogy is that of the caterpillar in the cocoon that transforms into a butterfly, and how messy that process inside the cocoon is, involving the complete disintegration of the body of the caterpillar and the creation, the eventual proliferation of these imaginal cells that are related to each part of the butterfly. And only when all the parts have come together and are ready to emerge does the butterfly break out of the cocoon, endowed with new capacities, including, for instance, the fact that it can fly and has greater perspective than the earth crawling caterpillar. All right. So these are two processes that we have to be fully aware of. The Baha'i writings describe both in a very interesting way, that they're both accelerating. So we're seeing that. I mean, with the news, every time you wake up in the morning and you check the news, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe all this happened overnight, right? The processes of disintegration, especially, are very evident at the moment. And both of these, including the processes of disintegration, have the same goal, which is to sweep away the barriers that have hindered humanity from achieving its goal, from transforming the planet, recognizing its oneness, and achieving its unity. Here is one example of a quotation from the Baha'i writings that sums this up. That this disruptive adversity is sweeping away hollow and outworn institutions, obsolescent doctrines and beliefs, effete, discredited traditions, all of which have been undermined. These are the key words now. Why have they been undermined? By virtue of the loss of their cohesive power. They've lost their cohesive power to hold things together, and their own inherent corruption. So when the apple is rotten at the core, you can't eat it, right? Okay, so we're sacrificing old, outworn qualities, institutions, traditions in order to create new ones that befit humanity's journey at this stage in its collective development. Third reason why is all this turbulence happening? Why am I going through it? Why is my kid having to go through it? Oh, my poor grandchildren. Oh, my poor kids. Humanity is being, according to the Baha'i writings and the Baha'i understanding, and I understand, please, this is a matter of faith for us that we're simply sharing with you, hoping that it might help you. So you take what you find helpful to you. Humanity is being simultaneously punished and purified in preparation for its true destiny. Again, what is the true destiny? The recognition, a deep awareness of our oneness and the unification of humanity, bringing peace to the world. That is our goal. That is what we're striving for. So what are we being punished for? Failure to keep the covenant of God. So you remember the old story of Noah in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that God enters in, gives him a promise and says, I will never flood humanity again. I will never destroy humanity again. I will always be here for you. But there is a deal here that God says, here's what I'm going to do. Because I love humanity so much, I'm going to continue to send these divine teachers as humanity progresses. But your side of the bargain is that when I send the divine teachers, you have to recognize and obey. Obey, follow the teachings, follow the guidance. So when a new divine teacher comes, historically, people have turned against that divine teacher. So the same thing happened with the coming of Baha'u'llah. And he says that humanity is being called to give account for its past actions. That's one thing. That's the punishment. Failure to recognize and heed the message of Baha'u'llah, who sent messages to all the kings and rulers of the world and to all the religious leaders, who together basically held sway over at least 85% of the population of the planet at the time. Things have changed now. The other part is we're being purified to prepare us for our future mission. We can neither escape the responsibilities of the past or shirk those of the future. You know, there's certain things that flow from our actions. So shirking responsibilities, also there's cause and effect. Again, I'm just going to go back to the idea of smoking. So I remember somebody asking, saying, oh, I've smoked most of my life and I realize how terrible it is for me. You know, will God forgive me? It's like, you know, it's not, of course, God forgives us for everything, you know, especially when we're sincere, but God isn't going to remove the stains off your fingers and your lungs are not going to be miraculously healed. So one continues to bear the responsibility for one's past actions while preparing oneself to live a healthier life, a life of contribution and meaning in which one is not sick, hopefully, and can actually function as a member of the family, a member of the community, and so on. What are we being purged of exactly? This is one of the interesting questions. So we are being purged of, here's the list: rampant materialism. I find it fascinating that what we're seeing right now in the world is going to force us to be purged of rampant materialism, or at least start the process. It is just mind-boggling, honestly. Second is moral corruption and laxity. We've lost our moral compass. We see it. We have corruption from the highest levels of institutions all the way to the bottom. The habit, for instance, of lying through our teeth while looking someone in the eye has become such a pervasive quality that one sees everywhere. You see it in the stores, you see it in your doctor's offices, you see it in your accountant's offices, you see it in the buildings you live in, you see it everywhere. People will just lie like drinking water, and that is corrosive and corruptive of the social fabric, and it leads to greater and deeper corruptions. Baha'u'llah says truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. So that was the second. So rampant materialism, moral corruption and laxity. And the third is racial and other prejudices. So name your prejudice: class prejudice, you know, economic prejudice, gender prejudice. It really doesn't matter. Human beings are very creative in creating these barriers of the us and them. You're less than me, and so I get to feel good about myself. And I also create an excuse to be able to hog all the resources and all the opportunities because, hey, it makes sense, doesn't it? I'm better than you. I'm a better human, so I'm entitled to it. All right, now the fourth reason, and here we get to the question that was alluded to in one of the quotations that was read earlier, I think by Paria. We have chosen the path of suffering already. That is a choice that we have made. Given that we are going to suffer and are already suffering, some more than others, let us at least make it count for something by grasping the opportunities inherent in suffering. So let's look at some analogies to unpack the opportunities. Consider how we weld two pieces of metal together. So these pieces of metal are rigid, they're cold, they're ossified. Think of us. Think of, like, in the United States, our political polarization. You get it everywhere in the world. Entrenched positions, ossified, rigid, nobody's going to budge from where they are. And we make the other wrong. It leads to nationalism, it leads to xenophobia, it leads to sexism, to racism. All the isms arise as a result of it. We're unwilling to yield or compromise. Now, apply the heat of suffering to this metal, and what happens? It eventually softens it up. The hotter, the better. The hotter, the faster the process goes, and the softer and more malleable the pieces of iron become, so that then through in the anvil of suffering, they can be forged together and made one indivisible whole. The Baha'i writings tell us that this is what is happening, that the fires of the calamities we're experiencing are punishing the perversity of the human race and welding its component parts into one organic, indivisible, world-embracing community. So again, we've got that outcome before us again. An example of how this works can be found in the Civil War in the United States that ended up welding a republic together. We lost 2% in 1861 of our population, which is the equivalent in today's population, that if you apply the same ratio, that's 6 million people. 6 million people today would have died in order to create that unity. Mark Twain famously said that the cataclysm of the Civil War uprooted institutions that were centuries old, changed the politics of a people, and wrought so profoundly upon the entire national character that the influence cannot be measured in the short span of 2 or 3 generations. So great thinkers of the time recognized what was going on. Let's look at another analogy, the analogy of what happens when we plow the earth. We plow the field in preparation for sowing new seed in order to get a crop and yield a harvest. Again, it's another exemplification of how suffering purifies the earth of weeds and thistles. And again, what are the weeds and thistles? Rampant materialism, moral corruption, racial and other prejudices. If we don't pull the weeds out, what happens when you try to plant something new? The new growth gets strangled. So we really, if we want to succeed in creating a better world, we have to remove these persistent weeds. The other thing that plowing does is it invites us as humans to go deeper and examine who we really are. That we're truly fundamentally spiritual beings, living a physical reality in which we get to grow as spiritual beings. So here's a quotation from the Baha'i writings. Adversities unimaginably appalling. Again, this gives you a sense of we're not naive, we're not in denial. Shoghi Effendi said this many decades ago, that we are going to face adversities unimaginably appalling. I'm not sure we've gotten there yet, because we can still imagine. Undreamt of crises and upheavals, war, famine, and pestilence might well combine to engrave in the soul of an unheeding generation those truths and principles which it has disdained to recognize and follow. Again, that is the goal. At this point, our Creator gave humanity, according to the Baha'i writings, a respite, gave us an opportunity to come to our senses, to consciously sit up and have our aha moment, like, oh gosh, yes, we've been on the wrong track, we're going in the wrong direction, we're flying off the face of the cliff, let's redirect the train of humanity. Looks like we didn't do it through our free will choice. Meanwhile, the consequences of our past actions are building up, like with climate change and the nuclear threat and so on, and hubris and pride and nationalism. And also our loving parent, our creator, has gotten fed up and is laying down, exercising some tough love like we do with our teenagers at home. We set boundaries. We don't just say, oh, honey, that's fine. You want to bring all your friends over and do drugs every night till all hours of the morning? We love you. Go right ahead. And here, let's give you some pocket change so you can go and do that as well. No. Now, the next thing is suffering creates spiritual awareness. This actually is one of my favorite parts. This is a nub, this is a gift that I wanted to offer you that one can cull from the writings. So these seem to be, according to my understanding, the stages that we will go through, whether nationally or internationally. And so we can actually track them. You can, as you read the news and see what's going on, track them. The adversities and suffering will stir the conscience of the world. We started to see this with COVID, right? We saw that the Black Lives Matter movement started to gain traction in a way that it hadn't before because we were all cooped up at home, couldn't go partying and mindlessly having fun. And so, we were paying more attention to things and we were also a little more scared. And when we're more scared, we tend to be more receptive and looking for answers. So stirring the conscience of the world, or seeing the war in Ukraine, or seeing the war in Gaza, or seeing the war in Myanmar, or in Tigray, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, our conscience is starting to be stirred. But that's not going to be enough because we know what happens. Our conscience is stirred for a little while and then things get better and we go right back to doing business as usual, as we saw with COVID. Disillusion the masses. So I want to invite you to imagine, what do you think in your own mind will need to happen for the masses to be disillusioned? Things have to get so bad that all of us will be disillusioned. So as you see things disintegrating, don't go into fear response or, oh gosh, woe is us, can't believe this is happening. Think, oh, look at this. We're on our way. Disillusionment of the masses, because what will that lead to? It will precipitate a radical change in the very conception of society. We will completely reconceive, like, what is society? What is the social contract about? What does community mean? What does community look like? These are questions we have not been willing to ask ourselves. But things have to get so bad and the disillusionment so great that we will get really serious about it. We will be willing to consider a radical change in the very conception of society, which, according to the Baha'i writings, will then lead to this reconception, will coalesce the disjointed, look at this imagery, disjointed, bleeding limbs of mankind. When you watch TV and see what's going on in so many parts of the world, destruction in Kiev looks the same as destruction in Gaza, which looks the same as destruction in the DRC and Tigray. Destruction is destruction. Women and children being killed and dismembered and raped. There's carnage, buildings are destroyed, manufacturing facilities are destroyed, energy infrastructure, everything. It's honestly like living in the aftermath of an atomic explosion. So will be forged into a single body, organically united and indivisible. Now, the writings of Baha'u'llah also say something else, that this suffering will instill the sense of responsibility needed in the leaders of the new age. So one of the things that we've all been very disappointed in is that our leaders have shown, by and large, and I'm talking leaders everywhere, an inability to grapple and meet the challenges of the day, all the many challenges, as I say, from climate change to dealing with ending war and genocide and pandemics and trafficking in women and children and on and on and on. So this to me is one of the kernels that I cling to when I start to find myself spiraling, when I read news and think, oh gosh, and then I say, Saveda, stop. Another thought I will offer you, there are studies that have been done by top researchers at Harvard University on happiness and on living a good life. And one of these authors, his name is Sean Aker, says that when things are difficult in human life, and when we are faced with catastrophic failure, which that's what we're seeing, catastrophic failure. This is what it looks like at a grand level. He says three things human beings do, one of two things, typically. We either do more of the same thing we've been doing, we just ramp it up. It's like, okay, let's just do more of the same, more of that same behavior. Maybe it'll get us out of it, which, when you think about it, is crazy because it leads us to Einstein's view that insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. But this is a human tendency, apparently. The other human tendency, the other option, is to pull back progress we've made and say, oh, okay, we're scared now. Let's just pull back. We've gone too far, and we end up undoing developments. So an example to me, in order to frame it for you, is Brexit, right? So integration of the European Union, they're doing well on many fronts, but there are areas of the European Union that have needed reform for many years. The European Union has been unwilling to reform them. One of the areas was figuring out an immigration policy and a common defense policy. And finally, Britain, at some point in 2016, I guess it was, says, okay, we're done. We're out of here. We're going to divorce the EU and we're going to go off on our own and manage and control our own destiny. And so they take a step instead of deepening the integration of the EU, which is the real answer, and they're starting to recognize that, kicking and screaming now. They recognized that with the financial crisis was the first glimmering, then they recognized it with Kosovo, the genocide that went on in their backyard, and then they are recognizing it with the war in Ukraine, all these areas where they should have had their act together and have not, because they have not deepened their integration to create a federation of Europe, which was the original conception of this whole European project. So back to Sean Aker. He says we do either one, do more of the same, or pull back. He says, but there's a third thing that we need to learn to do, and this is a gift. He says, as we are failing, so spiraling downwards, this accelerated failure, he says we use the momentum of that accelerated failure to catapult ourselves in a new and different direction from a direction we've ever conceived of or gone in before. So it is a time to be bold, to be imaginative and creative, not to get paralyzed, not to hunker down, which is what we tend to do is like, okay, let me hunker down and just, think about this and figure out what I'm going to do, or just sit still hoping that the destruction won't be wreaked on my head. He says, no, we need to step out and catapult ourselves, figure out a new third direction and go there. I find this extremely exciting. The Universal House of Justice, which is the governing council of the Baha'i faith, said in a letter, quoted in a letter of 2024, September, that most people have no clear concept of the sort of world they wish to build, right? They know what they don't want. I don't want tyrannical ruler. I don't want this. I don't want to lose my money. I don't want to lose my privilege. I don't want to lose my power. I don't. But if you say, okay, please imagine with us, what is the world you want? And now what are you going to do to build it? Most people freeze. So I read this quote and then I listened to a podcast done by The Economist magazine, in which they had interviewed somebody in Syria, somebody off the streets. She was a woman. After Mr. Assad had left the country and this new government, this recent government had come to power, and the reins were being loosened for that period anyway. And they interviewed her, and one of the things she said that so struck me She said, I have never, she said, none of us have ever had the ability to speak our mind. We were always so scared and lived in fear. And it was all about watching ourselves not to say something that would get us arrested or imprisoned or tortured or killed or our families. So she said, we've never had the ability to speak our mind. And so never got into the habit of imagining a future for ourselves. We don't even know what that can begin to look like or the feeling of doing that. She says, we're just getting accustomed now to the feeling of having the freedom to start imagining and start speaking. The last program I did here was on consultation as the expression of the principle of justice. So if consultation is the tool to create justice in the world, and we said that this is what this whole endeavor is about, creating justice as an indispensable foundation of peace that then ushers in a new civilization. To get to consultation, people have to feel free enough to frankly express their opinions. And now we've got so many people in so many parts of the world who for years have lived under regimes that have not allowed them, that have squelched this freedom of thought, freedom to imagine, and freedom to express so that they can then consult and have the clash of varying opinions yield the spark of truth. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but at least we know the path that we are to pursue. All right. The choice we have to make is how much suffering is enough. This is a choice. We get to stop it when we decide collectively. And it will only happen when we come to this understanding that we are a single organism as a human race, and we're governed by the law of oneness. To me, the law of oneness is like the law of gravity in the physical world. You can't build an airplane and fail to take into account the law of oneness. It will fail. The same is true for building social institutions, whatever they are, economic, political, environmental, I don't care, religious. If we do not take into account the law of oneness and make sure that people are fairly represented and everybody's voice is heard and so on, and processes are just and fair, they will fail. Another reason for the catastrophic failures. We've built all these institutions blindly ignoring this law of oneness. Baha'is are not the only ones who believe in this. A lot of my work is kind of looking at ideas that I glean from the faith and then looking to see who else out there is also coming to these realizations and then marrying them together and rolling them into recommendations for solving global challenges. So recently I was reading a fascinating report by the president and CEO, for those of you who care about these things, of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. His name is Stephen Hines. And the title of his report is Logic of the Future. And one of the points he makes is that one of the shifts in mindset that needs to happen. So, I've been bleating about this forever, and it was so exciting to see this fellow say one of the shifts in mindset that needs to happen, both in this country and around the world, is recognizing our interconnectedness, our interdependence, and that we are one, and reimagining and conceiving all our institutions and processes. And he's got some marvelous ideas. I'll be doing a podcast on this in a couple of weeks, but I was so excited. It's like, okay, here we go. This recognition, the stirring of the conscience, and the willingness for somebody in that position to radically reconceptualize what society looks like, which his report does. I mean, honestly, it is a radical reconceptualization, and it aligns beautifully with everything in the Baha'i writings. I mean, it was so exciting for me. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay. So we also said not only are we aware of the genesis of these problems, the why they're happening, but we also have an understanding of the direction in which they're headed, which is why Baha'is are neither dismayed nor confused. We may be concerned, we empathize, We're distressed by other people's and our own suffering because we're all in this together. Nobody's immune from it, but we're not dismayed or confused. So let's unpack this a little. Here is another nugget of a quote that I want to highlight for you. Baha'u'llah says this after a time. So notice he doesn't specify when, so we don't know the timing of this. All, not some, not a fraction. And he doesn't say maybe, it's will. All the governments on earth will change. I don't know about you, and thank God we don't have clergy in the Baha'i faith. But when I look at the world today, I feel for myself that I am seeing glimmerings, possibly, of this happening. Look at governments, including in countries that we always thought were stalwarts and stable in a particular way, that we conceived of stability. And now we're seeing that all these governments are changing. Oppression will envelop the world. So this phrase follows on from the last one. He doesn't say, as a result, oppression will envelop the world. But when I read this, it's like, well, why did he put the sentence after that one? After a time, all the governments on earth will change. Oppression will envelop the world. And then, and following a universal convulsion. Who knows what that is? But it'll be universal. It's not local, it's not regional. You and I are not escaping it. Following a universal convulsion, the sun of justice will rise from the horizon of the unseen realm. Here we are, back again to what is the goal? Justice, the most great justice. Why? Because it's the indispensable foundation for building the most great peace. Why is that important? Because Baha'u'llah's come to usher in a new world civilization, which will be the fruit of that most great peace. So again, stages in the process. So again, when I look and I read the papers and listen to the news every day, instead of curling up under a blanket and eating a tub of ice cream, I think, okay, Saveda, you know this is going to happen because you have faith. You claim to have faith that you believe what Baha'u'llah has said. This is what he said. So buck up. Stop moaning. Don't whine. Don't be confused. You know exactly that things are going to get really bad. Again, we're not naive. We're not in denial. However, we don't get depressed and we don't get confused. So I wanted to share that quote with you. And then I want to share another quote with you. I don't have it on a slide, so you get to really practice being present and listening. For those of us in the United States who may be a little disillusioned by the chaos that we just generally see happening, here is what the Baha'i writings foretold about this several decades ago. I'm going to read it to you. The American nation stands indeed, from whichever angle one observes its immediate fortunes, in grave peril. Okay, so guys, those of us who are here, our nation is in grave peril. Again, we're not in denial. Here is the really interesting next line. The woes and tribulations which threaten it are partly avoidable, but mostly inevitable and God sent. Whoa. Let me repeat that. The woes and tribulations which threaten it are partly avoidable, but mostly inevitable. Nothing would have stopped this. And God sent. We're back to the origins of the adversities. Remember, we said it's part of a single plan whose source is God, authors Baha'u'llah, theater of whose operations is the entire planet. You're starting to see how these quotes all interweave with each other and play off each other. And then we have the explanation for, well, why? Why is this inevitable? And why is it God sent? For heaven's sakes. For by reason of them being these woes and tribulations, a government and people, this is us, all of us, clinging tenaciously to the obsolescent doctrine of absolute sovereignty. So we're clinging to this idea, outworn idea of absolute sovereignty. We get to do whatever we want to do, to hell with everyone else, essentially, that attitude, and upholding a political system manifestly at variance with the needs of a world already contracted into a neighborhood and crying out for unity. So those are our two problems. We'll find ourselves purged of its anachronistic conceptions. So these assumptions, these old assumptions that Peter Drucker talked about, these old ways of thinking, this belief that we have unfettered sovereignty, and this belief in unfettered nationalism, this belief in a system of government that is anachronistic and doesn't take into account the interdependence and the oneness of humanity, we will be purged of it. This is why these woes and tribulations are inevitable and God sent. It's part of what we were talking about before, part of purifying us and preparing us for something greater. What is the greater thing? Also in this paragraph. Once this nation, the United States, has been purged, it will be prepared to play a preponderating role, as foretold by Abdu'l-Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah and his successor. Preponderating role in what? In hoisting the standard of the lesser peace, in the unification of mankind, and in the establishment of a world federal government on this planet. That, folks, is the destiny of America, according to the Baha'i writings, that we will hoist the standard of the lesser peace. We won't get into this now. There's a lesser peace followed by most great peace. It's all part of a continuum, but basically the initial stages of a global peace, a political peace. We're going to imagine how much we're going to have to change to hoist the standard of peace in the world, to unify humanity, and to establish a world federal government. Look at where we are, look at what we're aiming for, where we are promised we will end up, in some sense, whether we like it or not. It's just a question of how much suffering is it, how hard is our head going to be, how much suffering do we need to go through to recognize that we need to do this. All right. And then again, this business of the purging. The goal is to purge us of the accumulated dross of ingrained racial prejudice, rampant materialism, widespread ungodliness. So we have a new problem here: widespread ungodliness and moral laxity. By the way, there's a lot of really good work being done at the moment. Work meaning a lot of great thinkers at the time of our time. So I give you another one. I gave you one guy who's a business guy. I'm going to give you the name of another fellow who is a professor emeritus of Harvard University, Robert Putnam, who in his latest book, Upswing, talks about the fact that history, through his research, he has changed his mind. He's changed his assumptions. He used to believe that in order to create a better society, so for America to move forward, we need to just start with good social programs, and you start with that, and then eventually the culture will change. And he says that all the historical evidence demonstrates that you have to flip it, and that's how change actually happens. It starts with moral clarity. Those are his words: moral clarity, recognition that we can't be selfish, that we have moral obligations towards others, and that those obligations are as great as the obligations we feel to ourselves. And once we change that culture, then progressive social movement begins. Fascinating, fascinating. Okay, let me see. Okay, here is the quote about accumulated dross of ingrained racial prejudice, rampant materialism, widespread ungodliness, and moral laxity. For those of us who worry about the destiny of this great country, the United States, and it is a great country, I want to read something that should warm your hearts. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, says that this great republic, the shell that enshrines so precious a member of the world community of also the followers of Baha'u'llah, but this shell will continue to evolve. So the American nation will continue to evolve undivided and undefeatable. I find those two words very comforting. Until the sum total of its contributions to the birth, the rise, and the fruition of that world civilization, the child of the most great peace and hallmark of the golden age of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, will have been made and its last task discharged. This is our last task as a nation, to lead humanity to peace, unification, a world federal government, and a world civilization. Wow. And we will continue to evolve undivided and undefeatable. Again, this is a matter of faith for Baha'is. So we have a great deal of faith in this nation and its capacities. In a recent letter, the Universal House of Justice has said that, sorry, I just want to make sure, yes, has said that the global challenges now facing us are a severe test of humanity's willingness to put aside short-term self-interest and come to terms with the stark spiritual and moral reality. There is but one interconnected human family, and it shares one precious homeland. I feel like taking this and kind of walking throughout Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Gaza and DRC and saying, hey guys, there's one planet and we all need to learn to live on it, share it, and live peaceably. There is no other option. In 2020, when we were at the beginning of COVID, the Universal House of Justice said this, that however difficult matters were at present, they were convinced that eventually humanity would emerge on the other side with greater insight and with a deeper appreciation of its inherent oneness and interdependence. And then later, 2 months later, they said, we're seeing early glimmerings of this, and that maybe a moment of collective consciousness may be in view. So COVID itself alone didn't do it. We started to see the glimmerings of collective consciousness, and now there's more suffering ahead because this process has to be completed. Okay. Again, for those of us who are worried that the world is coming to an end, Baha'is believe that humanity will not come to an end. I don't know how much of it will be left, but it won't come to an end. And what will happen is that these sufferings will release the potentialities inherent in the station of man and woman and reveal the full measure of our destiny on earth and the innate excellence of our reality. The last thing, so we know that we've covered the genesis, why are we going through this, and the role of suffering, and there's a step I've missed that I'm blanking on, but now we're at the point of, and what are the Baha'is doing? Remember I said we're not paralyzed, we're not confused. We are laboring intelligently to assuage the fury of these adversities and mitigate their effects. is, as Hannah Arendt famously said, we are free to change the world and start something new in it. It's an acknowledgement of the free will choice that human beings have. We labor in two spheres. We labor in the social sphere, so in the external world. One of the main messages of the Baha'i faith is that it's time to let go of the outworn notion of nationalism and to come together and create a new system of global governance that is fit to answer the challenges and needs of global society, challenges that demand global solutions because they're global in nature. Things like climate change can only be resolved collectively. Things like the abolition of nuclear weapons and eliminating the threat of nuclear war can only be achieved collectively. Putting an end to genocides and wars can only be achieved collectively, and so on. In a letter of 2001, the Universal House of Justice said this, that part of this process that we're moving towards of the lesser peace will involve, so they say the lesser peace will certainly not involve, will include a development of historic importance, that point at which the majority of the world's nation states formally commit themselves to a global order comprising institutions and laws and equipped with the means by which collective decisions can be enforced. When I see folks, everything going on right now with people trying to end the war in Ukraine, trying to end the war in Gaza, trying to end wars everywhere, and trying all these things short of creating a global system of collective security along the lines envisioned by Baha'u'llah, I can see that we're being forced to move kicking and screaming in that direction. We don't want to do it. But as Arnold Toynbee, the famous 20th century historian, said, the only solution is some form of limited world government. Otherwise, we will self-destruct. And he says, as soon as we recognize that, we will turn on the dime and get rid of this allergy we have, this very odd, bad habit, allergy to the concept of a world government. So I thought, and he was saying this in the 1970s, which is really interesting. So that's the first thing Baha'is are also engaged in, injecting ideas into public discourse about the need to quell this idea of unfettered nationalism and how to go about building what kind of institutions, a world parliament, a world executive, a standing police force that will preserve the peace on earth, a revamped international court of justice, reduction of arms, etc., etc., etc. The second thing the Baha'is are working towards, ideas that they're injecting into the public discourses of society, is the need to let go of this habit of expediency, which involves a short-term approach to solving problems and solving them in narrow national interests or narrow grouped interests, as opposed to taking a principled approach to tackling global challenges, which requires the leaders of our world to identify a set of principles that they can all agree on, forge consensus around them, and then apply them methodically to solving any given problem. The third thing I think that we're involved in at a societal scale is teaching ourselves and talking about what it looks like to elect fit and worthy leaders. What qualities should we be looking for? What motivations should we be looking for? And what standards should we be demanding? We also work on the internal, so transforming hearts and minds. We do this by sharing with our fellow countrymen and women the power of implementation that is necessary to establish peace in the world. Abdul Baha says that we all know that war is bad, we all know we want peace, and yet we don't have the motivation to do what it takes to get there. He says a power of implementation is required, and that power of implementation is the influence of the Word of God and the confirmations of the Holy Spirit. So that is something the Baha'is are also engaged in, and we're doing it through a worldwide program, as I said in my introduction, of empowering youth to be agents of positive change in the world, to be agents of service to humanity, to their communities, to their neighborhoods, to teaching the children virtues and moral values like oneness and honesty and truthfulness, things that we can all agree on. And in other words, things that are not peculiarly Baha'i, they are universal moral values that we have somehow lost. And to building a global community grounded in justice and unity. So that's basically it. If you want to see more exposition on a number of these topics, you can find it in my book, The Alchemy of Peace, that's available on Amazon. I also wanted to say that the podcast that I have, Reimagining Our World, is now available as an audio podcast on all your favorite podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, Podbean, you name it, it's there. So it's on the YouTube channel, yes, as a video podcast, but also available as an audio one.